the peace with toxic mouth farts. They were loud, they were angry. Hell, I'd be angry too if I spent 4 years of high school learning how to swim by having my head dunked into the toilet. Inside,
hundreds of protesters outside the Target Center in Minneapolis. Signs, chants, a crowd divided into two camps screaming at each other. And inside the arena, referees making calls so questionable that even casual observers are asking what's really going on here. This isn't about one game or one player anymore. This is about a league that's actively choosing controversy over basketball, and the consequences are starting to show.
During the second quarter, Sophie Cunningham was playing defense against one of the unknowns from the Minnesota Lynx. As Sophie was defending, the unknown viciously elbowed her in the face. Should be an easy offensive foul call, right? According to WNBA officials, this was a vicious foul on Sophie.
That's Sophie Cunningham getting elbowed directly in the face during the second quarter. Clear offensive foul, right? Any reasonable person watching that play sees the same thing. But here's what the WNBA officials called defensive foul on Cunningham. She got hit in the face and they penalized her for it. Now, you could chalk this up to bad officiating, and bad officiating happens in every league. But when you consider the context of what Sophie Cunningham has been dealing with, when you look at the hostility she faced from that Minnesota crowd, when you see what the head coach was wearing on the sideline, this starts to look less like incompetence and more like something else entirely.
You know, a lot of us creators here on YouTube are being blamed for no one talking about the actual basketball in the WNBA. Meanwhile, Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx, instead of dressing like a professional yesterday, instead of dressing like a head coach, Cheryl is wearing a shirt claiming trans belong here. We welcome everyone in the League of Inclusion.
Cheryl Reeve, head coach of the Minnesota Lynx, standing on the sideline wearing a shirt that reads, "Trans kids belong here," not in the locker room before the game, not at a press conference, but during the actual game, as her team's head coach, in front of cameras, making a political statement that has absolutely nothing to do with the basketball game being played in front of her. Here's what makes this significant. The WNBA has spent decades trying to convince America to take women's basketball seriously. They've fought for media coverage, for sponsorship dollars, for respect as professional athletes. And just when they're finally getting momentum, just when viewership is climbing and people are actually paying attention, the head coach of one of the league's flagship franchises decides that the most important message she can send is about transgender inclusion.
Transgender. And the thing is, Cheryl Reeve has players on her team that could be stars, but no one is paying attention to them because Cheryl is focused on putting all the attention, the spotlight, on herself. Case in point, Courtney Williams, or as she prefers to call herself, Bud Studs.
And here's the problem with what Cheryl Reeve did. She has legitimate stars on her roster. Napheesa Collier is one of the best players in the league. Courtney Williams has developed into one of the most entertaining personalities in women's basketball. These are players who deserve to have the spotlight on their performance, on their skills, on what they're accomplishing on the court. Instead, nobody's talking about any of that. The entire post-game conversation became about Cheryl Reeve's shirt and what it represents. This is the pattern that keeps repeating itself in the WNBA. The actual basketball gets overshadowed by everything else. And before you blame media members or YouTube creators for focusing on controversy instead of the game, ask yourself this. When the head coach shows up wearing a political statement on her chest, what exactly are we supposed to ignore that?
The bouncer refused to let him in because he had no idea who in the hell they were. On the surface, Courtney Williams kind of fits the stereotype of what the average person in America perceives a WNBA player to be. But over the last few weeks, as I've watched her at press conferences, or when she uploaded that clip on social media where she torched some doofus who lost money betting on make-believe basketball.
Let's talk about Courtney Williams for a minute, because her story illustrates exactly what's being lost here. Last summer during All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis, Williams and her teammate filmed themselves getting rejected from multiple nightclubs. They kept telling bouncers we're WNBA players, we're the Bud Studs, haven't you heard of us? And the bouncers had no idea who they were. At one point they tried to get into a party hosted by Angel Reese and couldn't get past security. On the surface, Courtney Williams fits every stereotype that turns casual fans away from the WNBA. The nickname Bud Studs, the presentation, the whole package. But here's what changed my perspective on her. She's actually entertaining. When some gambler lost money betting on her team and started cursing her out on social media, instead of playing the victim, she turned it into content. She mocked him. She made it funny. She showed personality. That's rare in this league.
Then yesterday, she spoke highly of Caitlin Clark as the media seemed to be trying to make something of nothing between the two. Watch it for yourself.
That's my girl, though. Hey, Kate Mitch, my girl, too. Man, just great players, man. It don't be like no negative trash talk. It's all just funny.
That's Williams talking about Caitlin Clark at a recent press conference. Professional, complimentary, no drama. She's showing the kind of charisma and media savvy that the WNBA desperately needs from its players. But who's paying attention to any of this? Who's talking about Courtney Williams developing into a marketable personality? Nobody. Because her head coach decided to make herself the story by wearing a political statement during the game. Think about what that does to player development and marketing. Williams has been working to build her brand, to show a different side of herself, to connect with fans beyond the stereotypes. And in one decision, Cheryl Reeve undermined all of that by shifting the entire conversation to transgender politics.
Believe it or not, Uncle Casey actually watched a pretend basketball game yesterday in the WNBA. My wife was cooking dinner. I had the TV to myself, so I decided to do a little bit of research by watching the LA Sparkles and the Portland Aspire on NBC. For starters, and this part is not surprising, NBC's coverage of the WNBA, it is significantly better than the garbage that we see on ESPN.
Here's what's wild about the timing of all this. The night before the Minnesota game, NBC aired the LA Sparks versus Portland Aspire. And for the first time in a long time, the WNBA put out a genuinely watchable product. Carla Lieti from Portland showed why she's one of the most skilled guards in the league. The game had flow, the coverage was professional, and the basketball itself was actually entertaining. NBC's production was focused on the game. No political commentary, no social justice segments, just basketball. And it worked. The game was competitive, the players showed their skills, and viewers got to see what the WNBA can be when it stays in its lane. But less than 24 hours later, we're back to protests outside arenas and head coaches making political statements instead of coaching basketball.
I don't think we should feel like our safe space is being threatened. I come from a space of inclusion, and the narrative that I think that is problematic is to suggest that, number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. There's a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive issue. We need to protect trans kids. Every kid. To me, it's a human rights issue.
These young girls that are sitting at games with anti-trans signs, do they understand actually what their real problems are, how they're being marginalized? We're still not in a space where we have.
This is what started the entire controversy. Cheryl Reeve at a press conference, delivering what some people called an inspiring sermon about transgender inclusion in sports. She talked about safe spaces, about protecting marginalized communities, about how trans kids belong in women's sports. And look, people can have whatever opinions they want on this issue. But here's the question that nobody in the WNBA seems willing to address. Is this really the hill you want to die on? The WNBA is not the NBA. They don't have the financial security to alienate large portions of their potential audience. The league lost money for 26 straight years before finally turning a small profit. They're dependent on NBA subsidies to survive. Their average attendance is still below 10,000 per game. They need every fan they can get. So when Cheryl Reeve and other WNBA figures decide to make transgender inclusion their defining issue, they're making a calculated bet. They're betting that the support they gain from progressive audiences will outweigh the fans they lose from everyone else, and early returns suggest that bet might not be paying off.
Because once again, the main storyline in the WNBA has absolutely nothing to do with basketball. This damn league has first-class tickets aboard the Bruce Caboose because WNBA players and coaches, they are actively hastening their own demise.
The Indiana Fever versus Minnesota Lynx game drew attention for all the wrong reasons. Not because of the basketball, not because of the playoff implications, but because of the circus surrounding it. Protesters outside, hostile crowds inside, questionable officiating, and a head coach wearing a political statement. This is not how you build a sustainable professional sports league. Compare this to how the NBA handles controversy. When NBA coaches or players make political statements, they do it in press conferences or on social media, not during the actual games. The NBA understands that once the ball tips off, the focus needs to be on basketball. The entertainment value is in the competition, not in the politics. The WNBA hasn't figured this out yet. Here's the fundamental problem the WNBA is facing, and it's one they created themselves. They've spent years building an identity around social justice, progressive politics, and activism. That's fine, that's their choice. But they never stopped to ask whether that identity would attract enough fans to sustain a professional sports league. And now we're seeing the answer. The numbers tell the story. Yes, viewership is up this year, but almost entirely because of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Games without them still draw minimal ratings. Attendance at non-marquee games remains poor. Merchandise sales are concentrated around a handful of players. The league's growth is a mile wide and an inch deep. And instead of capitalizing on this moment, instead of focusing everything on the basketball and the young stars who are actually moving the needle, the WNBA keeps finding ways to step on its own success. Cheryl Reeve's shirt is just the latest example. It's a pattern that's been repeating all season. Remember the dark side controversy? Dejanai Carrington calling Fever fans racist and referring to them as the dark side? That dominated coverage for weeks. Or the flagrant fouls on Caitlin Clark that turned into debates about race and privilege instead of player safety. Or the Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark narrative that the league and media kept pushing even though both players said they wanted to move past it. Every single time the WNBA gets momentum, every single time they have a chance to let the basketball be the story, someone in the league says or does something that shifts the conversation back to politics and controversy. It's like they can't help themselves. And here's what's particularly frustrating about the Cheryl Reeve situation. She's actually a good coach. She's won multiple championships. She's developed players, built a winning culture, and established the Lynx as one of the league's premier franchises. She has credibility and respect within basketball circles. And she chose to spend that credibility on a political statement that alienates a significant portion of the WNBA's potential audience. Think about the calculation there. Cheryl Reeve looked at where the league is right now, looked at the challenges they're facing, looked at the opportunity in front of them, and decided that the most important thing she could do was wear a shirt supporting transgender inclusion. Not focus on her team's playoff push. Not highlight her players' accomplishments. Not help grow the game. A political statement that she knew would overshadow everything else. The Sophie Cunningham situation adds another layer to this. Cunningham has been outspoken about protecting women's sports from transgender athletes. She's used her platform to advocate for biological women having their own competitive space. And now she's playing in arenas where crowds are hostile toward her, where officials seem to be calling games differently against her, where the opposing coach is wearing a shirt that directly contradicts her position. Whether you agree with Cunningham or not, she has the right to her opinion. She has the right to advocate for what she believes in. And the WNBA, which constantly preaches about inclusion and diversity and respecting different perspectives, seems completely unwilling to extend that same courtesy to players who don't toe the progressive line. That's the hypocrisy that's turning people off. The WNBA wants to be seen as inclusive, but only if you agree with their specific political positions. They want diverse voices, but only if those voices say the right things. They want to grow the game, but only if the new fans share their values. That's not inclusion, that's gatekeeping. And the result is what we saw in Minneapolis. Protests outside the arena, fans divided into camps. A basketball game that nobody's talking about, because the head coach made sure everyone would be talking about something else instead. This is not sustainable. The WNBA had a golden opportunity this season. Caitlin Clark brought unprecedented attention to women's basketball. Millions of new fans tuned in to watch her play. Ratings were up, attendance was up, merchandise sales were up. All they had to do was capitalize on that momentum by keeping the focus on basketball. Instead, they've spent the entire season creating controversy after controversy, alienating fans, and making it clear that if you don't share their political views, they don't really want you watching anyway. So where does this leave the league? In a precarious position. The Caitlin Clark bump won't last forever. Eventually, casual fans will decide whether they want to stick around or move on to something else. And every time the WNBA chooses politics over basketball, every time a coach wears a controversial shirt during a game, every time the conversation becomes about everything except the actual sport, they're making that decision easier for people. Cheryl Reeve and the Minnesota Lynx will probably face no consequences for any of this. The WNBA will likely praise her for being brave and standing up for her values. Progressive media will write glowing profiles about her courage. and the league will continue wondering why they can't build a sustainable fan base beyond their core audience. The answer is right in front of them. People want to watch good basketball. They want to see skilled athletes competing at the highest level. They want storylines about rivalries and championships and individual excellence. They don't tune into sports to get lectured about social issues. And until the WNBA figures that out, they're going to keep stepping on their own success. So here's my question for you. At what point does the WNBA's commitment to political activism start hurting the players who are just trying to build careers and make a living playing basketball? Because Courtney Williams, Napheesa Collier, and everyone else on that Minnesota roster deserved better than having their game overshadowed by their coach's shirt. They deserve to have people talking about their performance, not their coach's politics. And they're not getting that because the WNBA has made it clear that the message matters more than the game. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is the WNBA sabotaging its own growth by prioritizing politics over basketball, or am I missing something here? And if you made it this far, hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep covering this league honestly, whether they like it or not.